House to Home, brought to you by RE/MAX Diamond Realty.
Liz is here from RE/MAX Diamond Realty Guam, and we are talking about all things Guam real estate. Hafa adai, and welcome back.
Hafa adai, always nice being here.
Okay, now this is actually a topic, it comes from right here in the KUM studios. Our own Peter Anderson, our technical director in the back, was saying, how do we approach the topic of home expansion, and how far can we actually expand? Can we go all the way to, to the sidewalk and, kind of take that New York City approach where I'm going to build all the way out horizontally, and then when I can't, I'm going to start going vertical. But what are the limits as far as the law says?
On Guam, as our family grows, so for example, if we have 2 kids, eventually you have 3 or 4 or 5, and then you want to extend the bedroom or add more living room space. So in the old days, families used to just do that and no problem.
Sure.
And of course, there is a government code that you have to be within 8 feet from the sides of your boundary. And the problem I think that we all encountered was the old days, our parents, our grandparents, how did they mark the boundary points? They used to plant a row of coconut trees, and then they would say, hey, this is your boundary point, this row of coconut trees, and blah, blah, blah. But you really need a surveyor to know where your boundary points. And so for many years, people figured, well, this is within our boundary points, we're putting up our fence, we're gonna do this. And then later, when let's say they decide to sell, or they decide to do something different, and they have to go to the bank and they find out that you need a survey, so you want to check those boundary points, and then you find out that you're not within the code. They've extended all the way to the rear boundary point. You're supposed to be 10 feet from the back boundary point.
So 8 from the front,
2 from the sides,
okay,
and 10 from the back. So those are your mark parameters. In terms of marking your points. Your front, I believe, is about 15.
Okay.
So you want to make sure you always know where those boundary points are. So when you do your expansion projects, you're within the guideline. So if you're going to refinance or you're going to sell the property, you won't have any issues. Now, here's what happens. So for example, you're selling me the house, and I need to go get a loan. So I go to the bank, I apply for my loan, I'm approved. The bank will send out a surveyor. What that they'll send out an appraiser. So what that appraiser will do is they'll look at the home, they'll do their inspection, they'll measure the home, and then if for some reason they notice that there's some issues with the property, of course it gets notated. And then the bank could question that. And if they question it, they'll ask, well, you need to do A, B, C, D to correct this before we'll give the loan. So yeah, things could go wrong in the process, and if you're not familiar with how that works, it would really mess things up. So sometimes people are deeded properties from their grandparents or their parents, and then of course they need the money and they want to sell it. And they don't realize there are issues associated with the property.
How often have you seen that, like where people may have either by virtue of their own ignorance about what the regulations are, or they or they just didn't care, or maybe they got a shady contractor that went outside? What do they have to do if they're actually beyond those boundary points and they've built?
If they're beyond the boundary, they have to correct it. That's the problem.
So
there are 2 things. Correct it meaning if you have a wall that's exceeded and gone into that, you'd have to demolish whatever number of feet that is. Or let's say you have an extension prior to close of escrow, that has to be demolished. We've had situations where a patio was extended and we had to take off the tin that extended over that. So we had to take out that, correct the situation.
That's expensive and messy.
Yes, it could be. So again, you need to know where your boundary points are. And then we've had people who said, oh, we know where the boundary points are, let's put up this fence. And then later to find out the fence encroached onto the other property. Now you ask the question, how frequent does this happen? Well, it happens frequently, especially like I said, if the property was deeded by family and they're unfamiliar with the property in itself, or people are stateside, they've been gone for a while, and now they want to liquidate. They're going into retirement and it's time to cash in on the retirement funds. I mean, you don't blame them for that, but then when the complications come up, it's a matter of correcting it. Now, there was a window of time where the law was not in place about the boundary, your setbacks. So you always want to find out when was that extension built, because if it's within that window of time, then you can go to the government and request for a variance. So there are circumstances where you could go back and request for variance. It doesn't apply to all cases, but we always try to find out, well, when was this built? When did this happen? And then we try to figure out, okay, can we correct it without demolishing this wall? Can we correct it without taking out the gate or the fence? So there are ways, you have to check those windows.
Now, very quickly, as we're running out of time, unfortunately, we've talked about building horizontally again. What are the limits of people building second, third, fourth floors even and everything? How high can people go for residential property?
I believe you're up to three floors.
3 stories?
Yeah, and now, again, permits. You have to get those permits. Because later, if you need to do anything else, they'll ask, well, when was it built? Bring in your permits and stuff. But yeah, there are limitations even with height variance.
And last question, typically who is the keeper of records for all of this information for your own property? Is it incumbent upon the property owner to keep
usually,
it?
Usually owners, sometimes when they're selling, they don't have records of typhoon come, they've lost it. Then you try to go back to the government. Sometimes the government doesn't, won't have a record of it. Sometimes they will, you're lucky. But you should always keep your records in a safe place.
Okay.
Always.
Well, thanks so much, we really appreciate it. All right, everybody, there is a saying here we have on Guam, you're never truly a Guamanian until you build a outside kitchen on your house. But as we just found out, make sure you know where your boundaries are. All right, stay tuned, we're back after this.